Great C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, talks about the great vice, right? Or the great sin. And the great vice that he's speaking of is either pride or self-conceit. When I continue reading his book, I slowly realized that what he was talking about was me. I exemplified, everything he was talking about. I was, prideful. I was arrogant. I thought I was invincible as a high-ranking military, officer. And it wasn't until 2019 when everything came to a head. I just committed some crimes that were, unthinkable. I was labeled a violent offender. And I brought shame not just to my name, right, to my family, but to the U.S. Army and to everyone that, knew me. I ended up pleading guilty, to over 100 specifications, violating the Uniform Code of Military Justice, not just violent crimes, but also escaping military custody. Ultimately, as I pled guilty, I was sentenced to 26 months in military confinement at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. On December 11th of 2019, as I was sitting in solitary confinement, I was reading the book Born Again by Chuck Wilson, and also too, for not being firm in my faith at that time, I was cross-checking everything with the Bible because I wanted to make sure that that it was accurate. But as I was reading his story, I knew that the person that was being read through that book was actually me. And as I felt the Holy Spirit just like circulate through that prison cell, I dropped to my knees in that moment, and I surrendered my circumstances to Jesus Christ. A few months later, in March of 2020, as I was now sitting in a general population community at the Midwest Joint Regional Correctional Facility at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, COVID-19, hit the world abruptly. And one of the very first programs, that was suspended was pastoral care. All, church services, all ministry services, were ceased. And it was in those moments that we realized the very thing that does not go away are our problems, our issues, our spiritual fitness, our needs, right, to be able to be rehabilitated. And it was in those moments that I felt, like God calling me to lead a ministry. And the ministry started with a men's fellowship Bible study, in a general population with me and a couple of other men, just, being led to bring men together, right? But not just because we needed each other, but we needed to turn our circumstances over to Jesus. And in a few short months, right, we brought many men, to Christ, probably over 40 men. And in those moments, we realized, something powerful happening, that God was moving the needle in this prison facility, and that men started behaving, right? Men started to surrender their circumstances, and they started to see miracle after miracle, open door after open door, and seeing, right, the healing, right, the hope, the redemptive power that is only found in Jesus Christ. And it was in those moments, right, as I was set to be released in June of 2021, that I felt, God calling me to this very moment, that I was going to be called to this very moment in this place and space at this time to be able to start a ministry, right, to continue loving on people, because we know that if we love God, we love people, right, and that everyone in our community shares a condition of brokenness, and that all we can do is we can just continue to spread the love of Jesus, spread the gospel, right? Because we know that His grace is sufficient for us, right? For His power is perfected in our weakness. And that is why we are here to start Message Ministries. June 8th of 2021, I was released from military confinement. 24 hours right before being released, Chaplain Matthew Eddy came to find me in the holding cell. And he just came to express, one final message before I left. He just came to let me know that all of the work that we have done, all of the work that God called us to do inside that prison, was not lost. And that the facility administration and the warden had just authorized all pastoral care and church services to be reinstated effective immediately. And his, parting words to me before I left was, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And that was probably the very first validating moment that I knew that I was called into ministry, that I was, called, to share the love of Jesus in every place and space. And shortly after being released in September of 2021, I entered my, master's studies at Liberty University, with an emphasis in Christian ministry. And probably about 30 days later after starting that, I was reconnected with Ilene. I oftentimes joke that I was just minding my own business doing homework. And all of a sudden that DM dropped, and it was Ilene just kind of checking on an old friend. And we met up a few days later, and the rest is history.
Hi, my name is Ilene Jaramillo, and I'm the co-founder of Message Ministries. Over the course of my life, I had always prayed for a godly man, a man that I could work in ministry with and serve together, growing God's kingdom. After I was saved in 2005 and I gave my life to Christ, I immediately started working in youth ministry. But I found myself alone doing it. I didn't have a partner to work with. This led me to kind of giving up hope on finding that person and doing things my way instead of on God's time, which led to, divorces and not really living God's plan for me. But I never gave up hope. I didn't stop praying for the partner God intended for me to be with. And in October of 2021, Jeff and I reconnected. I sent him a private message, just checking on an old friend. We had known each other in high school and lived our separate adult lives. But I had noticed he had been missing from social media. And so when I sent him a message, it was really just checking in on an old friend and seeing how things were going. Little did I know that that day that we reconnected in person was the day that God was giving me the person that I had prayed for my entire life. Like immediately, within just a couple of hours of spending time talking, I knew he was my person. And then the rest, well, the rest is history, or more likely his story.